Jeez. Oh, I just got it. Okay, perfect. Here we go. I think this is gonna work now. I wanted to do a live stream on Yeshua is Yahweh, Yeshua must be Yahweh, and the reasons why. And I'm not going to state the typical reasons. Like, obviously, in the book of John, it talks about John 1 1, the word being God, the word being with God, and all that stuff. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about how Yeshua said he was higher than the Pharisees and how he was from above and how he was from below. I'm going to talk about a different reason that specifically all throughout the Torah and the Tanakh. A reason that many rabbis missed. And it's interesting because many Jewish rabbis, in their Talmudic reasoning, think that Yeshua is burning in human excrement because they think that, like the Torah doesn't point to some human Messiah. And actually their view of the Messiah is very distorted by by their religion. Whereas if they just read the Torah outright, they would see that the Messiah is Yahweh come in the flesh, perhaps an unglorified version where he restricts himself to not being omnipresent and not being all the features that he was there, that Yeshua was at the beginning of creation with Yahweh. Um, and there are many messianics even that will talk about how Yeshua was just the son. There's no way that he was anything more than that. He was just a faithful servant, even though Thomas said that he was God himself, that he had just achieved God status through his crucifixion, through his death and resurrection. Um, and we're going to see in the Torah is all about personal responsibility. That's the very essence of it. And so I'm going to present here today four or actually five different passages that I think are very relevant to this. And then I'm going to read an article that a rabbi wrote and basically react to it here live on stream. This is what a rabbi wrote regarding the Messiah, how he doesn't believe in the Messiah and the reasons in the Torah why, but I think he's very much misinterpreting the Torah, and I don't think it takes a PhD to interpret the Torah. So I'm going to go ahead and share first Ezekiel 18. Was from the prophet Ezekiel. And he says, the soul who sins shall die. The son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the father, nor the father suffer for the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself. So it really, like verbatim says right there, a son can't die for their dad's sin. A dad cannot die for their son's sin. Each has to bear their own, and each has to suffer for their own sin. And so, like, already we're seeing that each human has to bear their own sin, and not one human can be a substitute in terms of atonement for another human. Not a single time in the Torah does Yahweh accept human sacrifice. Human sacrifice is not an acceptable form of sacrifice for Yahweh. In fact, human sacrifice is what the pagans did. Child sacrifice mainly to Molech. You could talk about how the Canaanites did it with Molech. But yeah, human sacrifice is acceptable in the pagan cultures and for their fertility rituals and for their holidays, but it's not something that Yahweh once accepts. He accepted animal sacrifice as a covering. If you read all throughout Leviticus, and I'm going through the Torah right now myself, at least this year, and I'm right now currently in the book of Numbers because I think it's important to study. But yeah, Yahweh accepted animal sacrifice as a way for them to have a covering and a way for them to make, atonement for their sins. Not the ultimate thing, right? Not the ultimate sacrifice, but the ultimate sacrifice had to come from something more than a human in order to follow Ezekiel 18:20. Because again, the Torah is quoted both in the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, which just means New Covenant, all the time, and it's quoted in the Tanakh more often than not. And again, here's a very important example from the Torah where it shows that a human cannot die for the sin of another human. And it not only shows that, but it shows Yahweh's reluctance. It shows Yahweh's reluctance, not just reluctance, but unwillingness to be able to accept a human sacrifice. So Exodus 32, verses 30 through 35 says, now it came to pass on the next day that Moses said to the people, you have committed a great sin. So now I will go up to the Lord, or Yahweh. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. Then Moses returned to Yahweh and said, oh, these people have committed a great sin and have made for themselves a god of gold. Yet now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, I pray, blot me out of your book which you have written. Moses said, don't put this sin on them, put this on me, take my life. Don't take their souls away, take mine. And Yahweh said to Moses, here it is, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book. So he's saying, I will hold accountable, I will hold responsible those who have sinned. And Moses in this instance didn't sin, and so Yahweh wasn't willing to take Moses out of that book. Moses didn't sin in this instance, right? We know that Moses was fallible, and he ended up falling at some point, right? Unlike Yeshua. And verse 34 says, now therefore go, lead the people to the place of which I have spoken to you. At least in this example, it's not relevant. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit for punishment, I will visit punishment upon, here it is, them for their sin. And because Moses didn't sin in this very specific instance, that's the most important part. He was not the one that was getting blotted out. Moses wanted to make atonement on behalf of the Israelites, and Yahweh said, don't do it. And some people say, well, Yahweh already had everything planned out up to the point of Yeshua, and he had that. So, and that's a very valid point to make, is that Yahweh wasn't looking for Moses to make atonement on behalf of the people because he was just another human. And then Jeremiah 31, another very important, and Jeremiah 31 is all about the new covenant. Jeremiah 31 is amazing in that way. It talks about how Yahweh is going to write his laws on people's hearts. And in this same chapter, he talks about how that very same law mandates that those who sin against it must be held accountable, and not one may be put in the place, not one may die in the place of another to basically achieve forgiveness or atonement for those sins. Now, verses 29 through 30 say, in those days they shall say no more, the fathers have eaten. And it says they shall say no more, right? Because the new covenant, we're talking about the new covenant has already come. So this is a quote from Deuteronomy, or actually maybe not Deuteronomy, but this principle is taken from Deuteronomy. And it says, the fathers have eaten a sour grape, and the children's teeth are set on edge. But everyone shall die for his own iniquity. Every man that eateth the sour grape, his teeth shall be set on edge. And I wonder why that is, right? Because if we're able to receive full forgiveness because of Yeshua, and not only that, but Yeshua was given the power on earth to forgive every single person that he came across if he wanted to, if they were repentant of their sins, right? And that's only a power that's delegated to God himself. So he had to be divine, because this says everyone shall die for his own iniquity, and Yeshua didn't have iniquity, and Yeshua was more than a man, so he was able to be a covering for all of us, because I can't die for your uncle or your aunt's sins. I can't die for your grandma or grandpa's sins. I can't die for your mother or your father's sins. I can't die for the sins of my children if I ever have, if I ever achieve the blessing of having any children. I can't die for anyone. My soul can't die, my body can't die because of their sin. But as Ezekiel 18 mentioned, it certainly will die if my soul will, if I continue to sin. I know my body's going to die because I live in a fallen world, but my soul is going to die if I continue to sin against Yahweh. I won't see his kingdom. And so this whole thing shows the accountability of every single person for their own sin. And again, the fact that no one's life can be taken so that my sin is then atoned for. Now, Deuteronomy 24 says, parents. Now, notice we talked about how a father can't die in the place of their son, or the son their father, but this can also apply to mother-daughter relationships. We see in Deuteronomy 24, it uses gender-neutral language when it says parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children put to death for their parents. Each will die for their own sin. So again, we're not using any Brit Hadashah verses to say Yeshua was Yahweh, even though there's plenty of examples in the Brit Hadashah showing that Yeshua was divine and has come from above. But here, again, we see the principle that no one can die in my place if they are merely a human. So if they are merely a human, so one human life cannot atone for the sins of another human. So something greater, right? God, it just sounds weird, right? But God had to die for us so that we may live, and rose again 3 days, and we know 3 days and 3 nights according to the biblical account after he died and took our place, because these four verses or passages from the Torah and the Tanakh show that not one human being, not one human individual was or is capable of achieving atonement for us all. And First Corinthians 15, verses 3 through 8, this is, oh shoot, am I not sharing this? Oh, shoot. Was I not sharing the tab? I think I may have been sharing the wrong tab because I have four verses up here. I have the Ezekiel 18 that I was showing everybody. I have the Jeremiah 31 that I thought I was showing, but I guess I wasn't showing those ones. So here's First Corinthians 15 verses 3 through 8. I haven't quite learned how this works yet, so my fault. If you're able to follow me, that's fantastic. Hopefully you were. It says, for what I received, I pass on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures. Here are the scriptures, right? I showed you Ezekiel 18, which talks about, right? And what are the scriptures, right? Shaul, the apostle Paul is referring to the scriptures. He must be referring to everything that's written in the Old Testament and in the Tanakh. So we have Deuteronomy 24, we have Jeremiah 31, and we have Exodus 32. So we have all the scriptures. We even have the Psalms and the Proverbs, which say that salvation many times, and I'll go into the Strongs in the next teaching I do on this, but the Psalms and the Proverbs go into the fact that salvation comes from the Lord directly. And the word salvation is just Yeshua, and the name of the Messiah was Yeshua. Salvation and the Torah all throughout teaches that salvation can only come from the Lord himself, from Yahweh himself, and from absolutely no one else. It can't come from a faithful servant that he decides to send and put on earth just as some human. It has to come directly from Yahweh. And that's what it shows all throughout the Old Testament. And that's what I showed you when it says, according to the scriptures, that he was buried and that he was raised on the third day, according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. And after that appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep, right? And died, obviously, in the Bible. The Bible refers to death as sleep many times. Verse 7, then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also, as to one abnormally born. Paul uses the phrase abnormally born. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that in another reading that I do of this and what exactly that means. So the next thing I'm going to do, which I feel like I must do, is go over this article that's about what Jews believe. It's called What Jews Believe. And I'm going to go to my messages right now and put it up here because I think it's necessary for me to read this to you. And yeah, we'll get into that right now. What Jews believe, because again, many Jews have been duped and deceived into thinking that, there is no Yeshua, or that there is a Yeshua and that he was an evil man and a sorcerer, and he may have been intelligent and crafty, but he certainly wasn't sent by God. So we've got one person cannot die for the sins of another. And the sad thing is that they actually understand this principle, but they completely misapply it. So it says, in short, the Bible is clear and it is consistent. And I'll probably skip some of this because we just went over this. One person cannot die for the sins of another. In other words, the sins committed by one person cannot be wiped out by the punishment given to another. So in this article, they're going to say that's why it's impossible for Yeshua to have died for other men. But that's why there's a problem when they say that Yeshua was just a man, because then that is applicable to him. But if he wasn't just a man, then this law is not applicable to him at all. And these are the verses that we just read. Again, Exodus 32 passage, the Deuteronomy 24 passage, Ezekiel 18 passage, and Jeremiah 31. And the reason why I say these again or mention these again is because I failed to properly show them the first time. And so that was my fault. Here we go. A more complete explanation. The Christian understanding, right? This is too general, right? Because there are many more people than just Christians that understand here we go, that Jesus, the one they believe to be the Messiah, died for the sins of all humanity. In this view, the Messiah is supposed to be the blood sacrifice necessary for the forgiveness of sin. In other words, a human sacrifice, and they mistake this because the Messiah wasn't a human sacrifice. And he couldn't have been according to the Torah, because again, God in not in one place in the Torah do you see God accepting human sacrifice. We saw four different, actually no, we saw four different passages where God explicitly said, I won't accept a single human sacrifice to atone for anybody else's sins. Here we go. However, not only is this concept of Messiah not found in our Bible, they say, but we are also quite clearly and consistently that no, or taught quite clearly and consistently that no one can die for the sins of another, that one person's guilt cannot be forgiven because of another person's death. And that's true. And they mention Exodus 32. So here's the whole Exodus 32 passage. But again, they have this wrong because Yeshua, again, Shaul, there's a reason why Paul said that Christ died for our sins according to the gospel. And the reason why that's possible is because Christ, Messiah, had to be divine. And I could go into all the different reasons as to why he was divine. I could go into a million different reasons. But again, the number one reason that he had to be, I mean, first of all, he rose again. That's something divine in and of itself, being born from above, so to speak, that very day that he rose again, which I can go into in another lecture, won't get into it here. But he had to be divine. Like Paul said, if Messiah didn't die, he made it clear. He said, if Messiah didn't die if Messiah died but never rose again, then everything in our faith is completely vain. It's like like everything I'm telling you has no meaning, because if Christ didn't rise again, then the very foundation of our faith is non-existent. And so basically everything, either Paul's a liar, or this Jew who wrote this article is a liar, right? Or maybe not, well, a liar that is deceived. Um and I really feel bad for him, because like they don't understand that like Yeshua was the epiphany, and they don't understand that the epiphany could be the one to die. And so, and here we go. Here we go. I'm going to keep reading. Please note that the text tells us that the one who sins is the one who receives the punishment, and no one else. And Yeshua, he received a punishment for what? He didn't sin a single time. So he was the one put to death on behalf of all of us, because who's capable? It literally says that Yeshua didn't let. Do you remember reading in the Gospel of John? It says that Yeshua, that in him there was no deceit. In Yeshua there was no deceit. Paul says in Romans, let God be, truthful and all men liars. And it says that Yeshua in the Gospel of John wasn't a liar. He didn't lie a single time. There was zero, absolutely no deceit found in his mouth. And we know that based on the biblical characteristics of God, that Yeshua would have, if Yeshua was just a human, he would have fallen and stumbled. He would have ended up just like the rest of us. But because he was divine, there was no deceit found in his mouth. He was able to forgive the sins of other people, and he was able to receive the punishment on our behalf for our iniquities. Because it's like, even though there's that Deuteronomy verse that says that the man that hangs upon a tree, and Paul quotes this in Galatians, that cursed is the man that hangs upon a tree. And Yeshua and the reason why I quoted that is because Yeshua was cursed. He became the curse for us when he didn't even deserve it. And he hung upon that tree for, that afternoon that he was crucified, and then of course was taken off. But yeah, in the Torah, a cursed man was hanged upon a tree, and he became the curse for us. But again, we read this here that if he was just a man, he could not have done that. And then it also says the father shall not be put to death. Okay, so this is just them requoting the whole thing. Let's see. They said, here we go. Here's what they say. The whole of chapter 18 of the book of Ezekiel expands and clarifies upon this principle. Furthermore, this chapter teaches that all we can do to gain God's forgiveness is stop doing the bad and start doing the good. All right, let's see how this holds up So it says, the word of the Eternal came upon me again, saying, what mean ye that ye use this proverb concerning the land of Israel, saying, the fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. As I live, saith, I know they don't even include the name of Yahweh because they think it's blasphemy. Ye shall not have occasion any more to use this proverb in Israel. Behold, all souls are mine, as the soul of the Father, and as also the soul of the Son is mine. The soul that sinneth, it shall die, right? The soul that sinneth, not one soul shall die in the place of the soul that sinneth. So that's clear, obviously. The son okay, so this is kind of going through again what we already talked about. um let's see. So it says, all his transgressions that he hath committed, they shall not be mentioned unto him. In his righteousness that he hath done, he shall live. So if you do righteousness, you're going to live. If you do wickedness, you're going to die. It's really that simple. And at the end of the day, the gospel teaches that the only person, the only being that can die in your place to reconcile you to God, despite the fact that we've all done wickedly, is Yeshua. Um, and Yeshua just means Yahweh is salvation. It just means that's really all it means. And so when and many times in the New Testament, including the book of John, we see that Yeshua created the world with the Father, and that nothing was done without him. What do you think the word Elohim means? It's just plural for Eloah. So there had to be two Elohahs, two beings that were together. Both, he said, the Father and I are one. What else does that mean, right? He said the Father and I are one, right? Uh, it's just like, and then the son, or the son, right? Yeshua took on the role of son as he was on the earth. So he said that the Father is greater than I, and that's where many people say, I got you right there. I said the Father is greater than the Son, therefore the Father's God, and the Son is just the Son of God. But that's just ridiculous, right? Because Adam and Eve were created, right? And what does Peter say about the woman? Peter says that the woman's the weaker vessel. Peter says that the man is basically that the man's the stronger vessel, but just because one was created to have dominion over the other in natural order does not mean, just because technically, like biologically and physiologically and physically and all these other features, that technically the man is stronger than the woman, that doesn't mean that the woman isn't human. So just like, Yahweh, the Father, Yahweh, is greater than Yeshua, that doesn't mean that they can't both be Elohim. So that's what people don't understand is and then there's also people that have the understanding that Yeshua is Elohim, that teach this, that Yeshua is Elohim to us, and that Yahweh is Elohim to him. But they teach that just to say that Yeshua was not divine. They say that just to, like, there's a truthfulness to it, but they say that to make it like, okay, Yeshua, the Father was far greater than Yeshua. Yeshua was a faithful servant. He was obeying God. He was taking instructions from God, but he was not the person. He was not the epiphany giving instructions all throughout the Torah. And then here we go. Here's what the Jew says. Again, the same principle is stated in the book of Jeremiah. In the 31st chapter, God tells of a time in the future when no one will continue to believe, well, such a thing. And here's the problem. I think that this Jew has got it all wrong. He says that we're not going to believe that everybody has to be personally accountable for their sins, because Hebrews 10:10 talks about a righteous judgment coming upon the people that continue to sin willfully against God. And so clearly this principle of you're accountable for your own sins exists in the New Testament. But I think that the reason why he doesn't understand this is because Jesus wasn't just the suffering servant like people think, but Yeshua, he took on the sins. He got forgiveness for the whole world. And so what this Jew isn't understanding is the fact that the reason why we're we're not just going to die right here on the spot is because we have an advocate with the Father now, Yeshua. And he's already got the wrong understanding to begin with, when he doesn't think that a messianic figure, that the epiphany, so to speak, can come to make atonement for the sins of mankind. And so even in the next, so this is the actual quote of the chapter. So for what I'm saying, it's very foundational. And if you miss that part, you're not going to understand why it says that. It's not that no one believes that. It's that um, it's that when we ask, so it's that when Yeshua came, we officially achieved an advocate. Like I said, we now have an advocate with the Father. And so that's what he's not understanding now is that once Yeshua brought in and established the new covenant, not doing away with the law, he was very clear about that, but that he is now the advocate. And when we mess up, it's just like parents, like when we make a mistake and they love us and we love them, they're going to be, quick to forgive us. I'm not saying Yahweh didn't offer that in the Old Testament. I'm just saying that I could get into this too. Good gosh, Romans, the law of sin and death, right, was done away with. So just the law of sin and death, I that's a whole other thing. That's a whole other thing. But again, that's what this rabbi's not understanding. Let's just get back on track. The foundational understanding that Yeshua had to be Yahweh to actually make this sacrifice possible. And he says there's nothing but a restatement and elaboration on Deuteronomy. In fact, that's what I said, is that Jeremiah is just a restatement of Deuteronomy, just like there are many verses all throughout the Tanakh that are just a restatement, a reassertion of principles that exist in the Torah. And so he said, this is why Jews do not believe that there was any redemptive power at all in Jesus's death, because he said no one can die to atone for the sins of another. No one. Here's what he said. He needs to correct this statement. It should say, no one but God can die to atone for the sins of another. No one but God can die to atone for the sins of another. Because if he had that statement, it'd be correct. But this statement is clearly incorrect. He said such a belief is unbiblical. It has no basis in the sacred text and has no justification in Jewish theology. Well, that word theology right there is proof that it's just a bunch of tradition that he's basing his opinion on. This doctrine can be seen as an intervention for the sake of post-event rationalization. In other words, to give meaning and purpose to the crucifixion after the fact. Really? He's saying that the reason why Yeshua can die wasn't invented until after he died and rose again. I think that's a bunch of nonsense. I think we literally just said, um, I think he literally just said, God just said that not one man can die in the place of another, even though multiple times throughout the Tanakh and the Torah, it was prophesied that a savior could come. And in that cult religion, whatever cult religion he's in, is telling him you can't read Isaiah 53. That's called the forbidden text. Oh, you can't read about the Messiah. That's a big issue with us. No, you can't read about Yeshua. Nope, you're cursed. If you ever think about following that guy, you are cursed, and we will put a curse on you. That's how crazy these people. It's just lunacy. And then here it says some Christians may choose to interpret. And look, I'm sorry, I don't like to use this word, but really, if you don't want to follow Yahweh and understand Yahweh, to him you're just an infidel. You're lost. You're deceived. I don't want to hurt you. I love you like Yahweh does, but you're just an infidel. And he really he really wants you to come to the truth. He doesn't want any wicked person to perish. And it says that all throughout the scriptures. So here we go. Some Christians may choose to interpret other verses in the Bible to indicate the opposite, that one can die for the sins of another. And see, I didn't even do that because I didn't need to do that. I clearly showed the principle that one can't die for the sins of another, but we're talking about one person, one human person, not one sent from above, like Yeshua told the Pharisees when they were like ready to stone him. Why were the Pharisees so ready to stone him? Because Yeshua was claiming to be God. He was not claiming to be a human. And then now this rabbi or whoever says, if that were the case, this would mean that God changed his mind, or that he did not mean what he said in Deuteronomy 24:16. And we know that that's false because I already established consistency and already pointed out that within the Torah, that the only reasonable solution to solving this crisis would be that God would have to send himself in the de-glorified form of a human to be able to die for everybody's sins. And it's not that he's a human, it's that he's taken a hold. It's that he's in a human body. He puts himself within the human domain and he operates like basically at the same capacity that we can operate. He gives up everything, gives up his glory, his power, his throne and comes down. And that's what people don't understand. How can Yeshua be exalted to the right hand of Yahweh? Psalms 110, David literally talks about how God sits at his very own right hand. Just read the first few verses. God, and one might say, how is that possible that God can sit at his very own right hand? It doesn't even seem to make sense. How do we make sense of the divinity of Yeshua? It's almost hard. It's almost like beyond the human mind to comprehend, but it's something amazing. And it's how we've even arrived to this point. And here, I'll just finish here. But God does not change either his mind or his nature. And I agree with this Jew on this part and this principle. It says in Malachi 3:6, for I am eternal, I change not. Therefore, ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. So God doesn't change his mind or his nature, and that includes his Torah, but that also includes the principle that one man can't die for another. But that leaves only a small avenue for Yeshua to come through, and that's through being something other or greater than a human. He says, in a newer technique, some Christians are now quoting rabbinic writings to make it seem as if the rabbis have accepted this concept of vicarious atonement. However, even if several respected rabbis did agree with this idea, we must still go by what the Bible states, and the Bible states in no uncertain terms, every man shall be put to death for his own sin. Um, so that's where Christians got it wrong too, is, well, many Christians, I give them this. They understand that Yeshua is Yahweh. I mean, at least they understand that. And there are many Messianics that don't seem to understand that, or they seem to give that up because they want to throw everything away from Christianity as a lie and not accept some things that they may have learned in the church that were actually true, contrary to their beliefs. And see, that's the problem. Every single thing you were taught in church probably is not a lie. You've got to test it with the Bible. Maybe 20% of the things you were taught in church are true and the rest is just like chicken poop. But take the 20% that you learned and apply it and use it for today. Your Christian church, even though God had you there for however long, it might have actually still been a blessing for you in ways that you may not realize. Um, and so that's the problem. The Jews are deceived, the Christians are deceived. Neither of them are on this narrow path to understand that, like, if the Christians could easily make the rabbis eat their own if they wanted to, if they understood this. But the reason why they don't is because they read 15% of their Bible, and by 15% of their Bible, I mean whatever, like 30, maybe 30, 25% of what's in the New Testament, and then they call it a day. So, or a year, or a life even. And so that's another problem. And so I'm going to end this here. This was a crazy rant. I wasn't even expecting to make it this far, but I appreciate it. It's all the work of the Holy Spirit. It's not really my own work as much as some people look at it that way, but and I'm kind of seeming out of breath, but that's because but it was the wind, the ruach, the wind, the spirit, the breath of God, that I felt like that's what was in me just now instead of my own. So I'd appreciate a like, I'd appreciate a share, I'd appreciate all those things, because, and I hope this message blesses you. God bless you, everybody, and have a good night. And I hope you had a good Sabbath. Take care, and shalom, shalom, peace.